In this quick tutorial, I'm going to show you how to get started quickly with BigInsights version 4.x on cloud with examples on GitHub. So what I'll do is show you how to get the sample code from Git. We're going to run the examples, and then we're going to run a smoke test to run a series of examples together. Now before we begin, I'm going to assume that you've already got your BigInsights for Apache Hadoop on cloud already provisioned on Bluemix. And if I look into my service, I can see I've got my cluster created, and also I can see my credentials here where I've created a user called biadmin. I've got the name of the host of how I can access the cluster, and I've got different service URLs here available for me to see. I'm going to need this information to run the examples. So here I am on GitHub at the URL where all the examples are published. And you can see that on this page, there are a number of folders and files. And at the bottom, there's a README with instructions on how to run the examples. So we're just going to follow these setup instructions to get the examples. Now, if you're running Windows, you can go to Git for Windows at github.io where you can download Git. And this is what I'm using here. So here I have Git for Windows, and I'm just going to follow the instructions. So here we see that it's downloading all the samples from Git. The next step is to modify the connection properties from which all the examples will use. So first, we'll go to the directory and we'll copy the connection properties file. And let's edit it to use our own values. You'll see a number of places where it says change me. This is where we'll have to substitute our own values for our cluster. So going back to our BigInsights cluster, we're going to use this host name and change it. One thing we'll also need to do to support the examples is to uncomment this line that says allow any host for the examples. This is generally not considered to be secure, but it will help with making the examples easier to run. Now as you scroll down, you'll see that there are some settings for Cloudant, as well as Spark and -db, and you can leave those for now if you're not testing those services. Next, we'll download the certificates required to access the cluster. For that, we'll follow this step. And then we'll download the libraries. Now we're ready to run our examples. In the documentation, you'll see it references here Gradle, W, the example we want to run, and then also a parameter, in this case ls. So what this will do is run web Hdfs with the ls command. So let's try that first and see how the framework of the examples are built. Okay, and what this example has just done is run the ls command for web Hdfs. Let's take a look at that example a little more carefully. It's first going to the examples directory and looking at the examples called web Hdfs groovy, along with a parameter called ls. If we scroll up and we go to the examples folder, you'll see that there is a web Hdfs directory for groovy, and there's an ls script in there as well. You'll see that there's a makedir and a put, and also a Gradle build file. If we look inside the source code, you'll see that there's an ability to run each of the individual examples or run all the examples with example. As it turns out, in any of the folders, you can actually run all the examples available for that particular module. Going back to the web Hdfs groovy example, instead of running ls, I can just type example. And this will run ls, make dir, and put. And so that was successful. We can follow this model for other examples as well. So let's look at, for example, the web Hdfs curl methods. You'll see that there's examples for ls, make dir, and put, as well as the Gradle build file. And you can see that if we use the parameter example, it'll run all three examples. So let's try that. There's my ls, my make dir, and my put. So any of these examples follow the same basic framework. You just point to the directory and run the example. So finally, I'm going to show you how to run a smoke test, which will basically run through a series of tests automatically so we can see what's working and what's not working. The way to run a smoke test is actually documented here as well. You'll see that if we run with Gradle W with the test parameter, it will run the full set of examples and takes 40 minutes or longer, depending on how many tests are being run and how large your cluster is. So now we're back and we can see that the test took about 10 minutes and it indicates build failed. But this is because just one or more tests had failed and I don't have everything installed on my cluster. So if I look at the results, we can see that many tests passed, some tests were skipped because I don't have Spark installed, for example, and I do actually have one failed test here which could require some further investigation. Now, just as a reminder, this is an open source project, and we hope that if you like this, you can also contribute as well. This concludes the tutorial for getting started with BigInsights examples on Git. Thanks for watching.